Somewhere in a frozen forest, buried under decades of snow, lies something that should not exist. A colossal rigid airship, the kind the world stopped building after the Hindenburg went up in flames in 1937, sitting intact among the pines. Kevin was just a hiker tracing an unmapped trail. What he found instead was a ghost of aviation history, a machine someone tried to erase from every record. And inside the frozen gondola, a flight log reveals exactly why. Kevin didn't just find a crashed machine. He found a secret someone spent decades burying, not under snow, but in the archives. The flight log he pulled from the gondola doesn't match any known airship. The question no one can answer is, what was a highly advanced experimental Zeppelin doing in a forest no one was meant to search? Kevin spent 3 days in that clearing before the shock let him move. The airship was not a small blimp. It was a rigid, duralumin skeleton giant, 680 feet from nose to tail, longer than 2 football fields, its silver frame draped in torn fabric that still bore faint military insignia beneath the frost. This was the sort of machine the world stopped building after the Hindenburg burned in May of 1937. Yet here it was, preserved by temperatures that never rose above freezing, a monster of the golden age of flight, resting upright as if a ghost crew had set it down gently and simply walked away. Kevin is no aviation historian. He's a backcountry tracker, part survivalist, part documentarian, and he knew immediately this find would rewrite everything. He set up a perimeter, flagged the coordinates, and the moment he had satellite reception, he sent a single photo to the only person he trusted with impossible things. That person was Amanda Cross, a structural fabricator who had spent 15 years restoring vintage aircraft. Amanda thought the image was a hoax until Kevin sent a second photo, a close-up of the gondola's control car, its windows still intact, and a faded maiden flight plaque bearing a date no record could explain. The plaque read November 12, 1941. That was impossible. By 1941, every surviving rigid airship had been scrapped for aluminum to build fighter planes. The last American dirigible, the USS Los Angeles, had been dismantled in 1939. Every aviation timeline says there were no active Zeppelins left. But here, what Kevin and Amanda couldn't ignore, the wreck wasn't just preserved by cold, it was hidden. The forest canopy had grown around the hull like a curtain, and the flight path that could have put it there didn't exist on any civil or military chart. Someone had flown this airship deep into restricted wilderness during wartime, and then they'd made certain no one would ever look for it. Kevin forced open the gondola hatch on the 4th day. Inside, frost clung to instrument panels that were decades ahead of their time, navigation equipment that resembled nothing from the 1940s. And in a leather briefing satchel, he found the flight log. The cover was stamped with a single word in black ink, Argonaut. That name also appeared in Zero Historical Archives. He opened the logbook and read the final entry. The handwriting was hurried, written under pressure. It described a rendezvous gone wrong, a cargo that was never meant to exist, and a destination that wasn't on any map. The last line was not a mayday, it was a warning. And the moment Kevin finished reading it, he realized the airship had not crashed. It had been abandoned intentionally, to hide something still inside. Kevin didn't sleep that night. He read the logbook 3 times by headlamp, and every pass revealed a new layer of impossibility. The cargo manifest listed something called Unit 6, a designation that appeared nowhere else. The weight and balance calculations were for a load that didn't match any known wartime payload. And the flight commander's final entry said, "We are instructed to leave it here and walk out. No recovery, no record. This is the last order of the Argonaut." At dawn, Amanda arrived by snowmobile with tools, a portable generator, and a crowbar. Together they forced the rear cargo hatch, which had been welded shut from the inside. The hold was not filled with bombs or supplies. It contained a single sealed chamber, a cylinder of lead-lined steel, 8 feet long, mounted on shock absorbers. Frost had formed around its seams in strange patterns. A radiation trefoil, hand-painted and smeared, marked the casing. This was no conventional weapon. This was something someone had decided the world should never know existed. Amanda traced the serial numbers. They didn't match any ordnance catalog she had ever seen, and she had spent years in military salvage. The cylinder was intact, but its contents were unknown. They chose, for the moment, not to open it. The bigger immediate problem was the airship itself. The duralumin skeleton, Amanda explained, was the easy part. Aluminum alloy frames from the golden age of Zeppelins were over-engineered to an almost absurd degree. This frame had survived decades of snow load without buckling. The real impossibility was the gas cells. The Argonaut had used 16 cotton bags, each one as long as a city bus, treated with gold beater skin to prevent hydrogen leakage. That material rots. It disintegrates. The knowledge to fabricate new gas cells at this scale is, for all practical purposes, extinct. But Amanda had a name, an elderly retired engineer in Switzerland who had spent his life studying dirigible construction. She made a call from the only high point with satellite signal. The engineer listened, asked for photographs, and then went silent for a full minute. When he spoke again, he said, "That ship should not exist, but if it does, I will help you." He promised to send plans for a modern gas cell replacement using synthetics if they could keep the frame stable. Over the next 2 weeks, Kevin and Amanda worked in 12-hour shifts. They braced the main ring bulkheads, hung tarpaulin to keep new snow from accumulating, and began the painstaking process of mapping every girder for stress fractures. The skeleton was sound. The airship had been built to an almost paranoid standard. That raised another question. Who orders a military airship constructed with peacetime luxury specifications during a war that demanded speed over perfection? Kevin dug deeper into the logbook. The flight crew had been 12 men, all unnamed, all identified only by numbers. The mission had originated from a base with no coordinates, just a code word: Niflheim. In Old Norse myth, Niflheim is the realm of ice, mist, and the dead. It was the name of a place that should not exist, and the final resting place of a weapon that could have rewritten the Second World War. Word began to spread. Not publicly, not yet, but Kevin had sent a few encrypted messages to trusted contacts in the historical aviation community. One of those messages triggered an alert. Within 72 hours, a black vehicle appeared at the closest logging road, 20 miles from the site. The men inside asked a local ranger about photographers in the backcountry. No badges were shown. No official inquiry was logged. Kevin realized they had a very narrow window. If they wanted to prove the Argonaut existed and force the world to ask the hard questions, they had to do something unthinkable: get the airship off the ground. Not a full flight, a tethered lift. Just enough to show the frame held, the cells could inflate, and the ghost in the forest could rise. But that meant solving the gas cell problem in a matter of weeks, with no funding, in secret, while someone was closing in. The bridge to the impossible had just been laid. The Swiss engineer's name was Dr. Hans Vogel, and he had once led a failed attempt to build a modern rigid airship in the Netherlands in the 1990s. His consortium had run out of money before they ever filled a single gas cell. But the knowledge didn't die. Vogel had spent the decades since perfecting a synthetic membrane, ultra-thin, helium-tight, and flexible enough to withstand expansion at altitude without the gold beater skin that had doomed the old ships. He transmitted the fabrication specs within hours. Amanda assembled a cleanroom tent inside the airship's wrecked hangar, using portable heat lamps to maintain temperatures the membrane required. It took 8 days to sew the first full cell, 60 feet long, and another day to pressure test it. It held, but while Amanda stitched gas cells, Kevin broke the real code. The flight log wasn't just handwritten notes. The final 3 pages contained a numerical cipher that looked like a routine weather log. Kevin, running on caffeine and paranoia, cross-referenced the sequences against wartime enigma tables and old naval codes. What emerged was not coordinates. It was a protocol. Unit 6 was not a bomb. It was a biological incubation chamber. The lead shielding wasn't for radiation. It was to protect the payload from the cold while preserving whatever lived inside. The manifest's weight calculations, the airship's climate-controlled cargo hold, the sealed seams, it all pointed to a weapon far more terrifying than a simple explosive. The log identified the pathogen as a modified strain of plague bacillus designed for aerosol dispersal. The Argonauts' mission, ordered in 1941, was to fly low over a specific coastline and release the agent under cover of fog. The plan had been to make it look like a natural outbreak, decimating a civilian population before a scheduled invasion. Then someone canceled the order. A commander, unnamed in the log, refused. He flew the ship into the deepest wilderness he could find, ordered his crew to abandon it, and left the biological payload sealed so no one would ever weaponize it again. That commander's final handwritten instruction was simple: let the ice bury us. Kevin stared at the lead cylinder with new eyes. It was not a relic. It was still dormant, and the men in the black vehicle weren't government agents trying to cover up a secret. They were contractors from a private organization that had been searching for the Argonaut for decades, not to expose it, but to recover Unit 6 and complete the original mission's objective. Kevin's encrypted messages had been intercepted. Now a six-man team was working its way through the forest, less than 15 miles out, guided by a drone that had already spotted the airship's clearing. There was no time to wait for approval, for historians, for backup. Kevin did the math. The gas cells would be finished by morning. The engines would never run, but with buoyancy alone, they could achieve a tethered lift, just enough to raise the hull above the tree line, visible to every satellite and news helicopter that might be watching. Once the world saw a frozen Zeppelin rising over the pines, no private force could make it disappear. The question wasn't whether the Argonaut could fly. It was whether Kevin could get that cylinder airborne before the recovery team breached the clearing and took back what their predecessors had failed to deliver 80 years ago. The tethers were the problem. Kevin and Amanda had enough synthetic cable from the portable winch to anchor the airship to 4 massive pines, but rigging them in total darkness, with the recovery team closing to within 6 miles, was a race against a clock that had no mercy. They ran the lines at 3 in the morning, Amanda crimping the cable ends while Kevin listened to the forest. The drone had stopped buzzing an hour ago. That meant the team was now on foot, moving silently past the last ridge. At 4:15, they began inflation. Dr. Vogel's synthetic gas cells, 6 of them now sealed into the forward bays, accepted the helium from their portable tanks with a sound like deep breathing. The duralumin frame, dormant for 8 decades, groaned once as weight shifted from snow-covered earth to the lifting body above. It was a sound Kevin would later describe as the ship remembering what it was. By dawn, the Argonaut was straining against the tethers, its nose oriented toward the clearing's edge. Frost fell from the fabric in sheets. Amanda sealed the last cell and scrambled down. Kevin stood at the manual winch, one hand on the release, staring through the trees at the first silhouettes emerging from the timber line. 6 men in cold weather gear, moving fast. He could have released the tether then. A full inflation would have ripped the airship free, carried it into the sky uncontrolled, and destroyed any chance of documenting the lift. Instead, he waited until the men were within shouting distance. One of them raised a hand, not to fire a weapon, but to show a badge. Private security, contracted by a pharmaceutical conglomerate that had inherited the Argonaut's original funding lineage. They claimed salvage rights. They demanded the cylinder. Amanda stepped forward with a satellite phone, live streaming to a historian's network that had been monitoring their progress for days. The feed was rough, but the image was unmistakable. A frozen Zeppelin, a woman in a parka, and behind her, a lead-lined cylinder that once held enough plague to depopulate a coastline. Kevin released the brake. The winch spun, the tethers played out, and the Argonaut rose. It climbed 50 feet, then 100, its aluminum frame catching the first true sunlight the forest had seen in months. The men below stopped moving. There was no argument against a machine that size, suddenly alive, suddenly real. Within 20 minutes, the footage had been picked up by 3 international news outlets. Within an hour, military helicopters were en route to secure the site. The recovery team melted back into the tree line, never identified, never charged. The world had seen the ghost before any private hand could claim it. The cylinder was taken by a hazmat unit from the National Guard. Tests later confirmed the strain was still dormant, still viable, but preserved exactly as the commander had intended. Sealed, inert, waiting for a lab that would destroy it safely. The unnamed officer who had saved millions by flying into oblivion was finally identified. His name was Lieutenant Commander Elias Breck, a decorated naval officer who had vanished from all records in December of 1941. No medal for him, no memorial, just a handwritten entry in a logbook that said, "This ship will never be found. That is my final service." But here's the detail that Kevin didn't release until years later. Breck's log contained a final page, tucked behind the cipher, written in a different ink and addressed to anyone who might one day read it. He had not acted alone. There were 4 other ships, he wrote, 4 other crews who refused, and somewhere in frozen forests and Arctic wastes, in the deep silence of places men never go, they are still waiting. The Argonaut sits in a climate-controlled hangar now, the only surviving rigid airship of its era, a monument not to war but to the men who refused. Lieutenant Commander Breck never got his parade. No textbook credits him with saving lives. He flew into silence and trusted the ice to keep his secret. But his real message, buried in that final page, was not just a confession. It was a map. The 4 other airships are still out there, still waiting, still holding their own sealed truths. Somewhere beneath the permafrost of the Arctic, under the snowpack of a remote mountain range, the ghosts of 1941 are hanging in the dark, perfectly preserved, ready to be found. History is full of things we think are lost forever. But as Kevin proved, sometimes the past just wants to be uncovered. If you want more stories like this, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. See you in the next one.